Hi, I'm Yolanda and this is Speak On. Our current series is Gender and Society, so of course, as a cis woman, I must absolutely say something about transgender people. Obviously I'm joking. I am actually tired of hearing cis people talk about trans issues and rights like they're the fucking experts. If you read a newspaper, go on the internet, or turn on the TV, you'll see shocking headlines about trans people lately, and it just feels like it's getting worse. Much like white people constantly debating racism and treating my reality and trauma as a fun sociological discussion, trans people have to put up with an increasing obsession about their lives and rights to simply exist. Despite the fact that an estimated 1% of the population is trans, people are given a lot of airtime to shit talk them. Trans people face really high levels of abuse, are subject to hate crimes, and massive inequality. Why the fuck can't we let people just live their lives? And why can't we mind our goddamn business? To discuss this today, I'm joined by Ceecee Jacobsen. She's a life coach, a public speaker, mental health activist, and model. Welcome, Ceecee.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. So for our listeners who don't know who Ceecee Jacobsen is, how would you briefly intro yourself to them?
Oof. I am Cecilia Jacobsen, and I am the first openly transgender person in my country, which is not how I usually introduce myself to people. Usually I don't mention it at all unless it's necessary. So this is a very inorganic way of doing it for me, but that is who I am. And because I was the first and my country is small and quite religious and backwards, I grew up with a lot of social abuse is what I'll call it. I don't think there's a word really for it. Like it's something that I've only ever seen in history books, typically ethnic or racial minorities, how I was treated, because how I was, the only one, and it was a whole country. It wasn't like school or my family. It was an entire country that participated in and approved of the alienation and dehumanization of me as a person. And it's something that I don't see a lot in other white queers either, who usually have it in school or they have it in their family, but then they find a community and so it was a lot, right? And then I talk about that now. That's what I do. I'm a public speaker and I talk about my life and the resulting mental health issues and the complex trauma that I endured and the many, many years of depression and how I overcame them and became a happy, healthy person who tries to spread a message of love, empathy, and forgiveness to other people, because I believe that for a lot of us, the only way to facilitate healing is through being the best version of ourselves that we can be. And that includes being a good person to other people, even if they don't always deserve it.
That was lovely. I loved that. That was so nice. So what does it mean to be transgender? Because so this series of Speak On, this particular theme is gender and society, and I've spoken to some amazing people so far. And the reason we are talking about gender is because there are still so many misconceptions about it. There are still so many things that people, they're entrenched in their views, in their ways. There's still so many people outside of communities talking about people within communities, which I'm very used to as a Black person, constantly having white people debate racism, and then lots of cis people debate being transgender and the rights and issues around that. And I think a lot of people genuinely just don't really understand. So how would you describe, what does it mean to be transgender?
I think, first of all, belonging to any marginalized group of people, the first thing it means is that you are marginalized, right? The first thing it means is that in some way or another, you are going to be considered less than. People are going to talk about your basic human rights as if it's a matter of opinion. And there are arguments on both sides, and your identity is up for grabs. And I think that is universal across all minorities.
Yeah.
Being trans specifically, I think it's difficult for me to articulate what being trans specifically is because it's become such a broad concept now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I think made me uncomfortable at first because even though I am trans, I am very binary trans in my own experience.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a society that is one way. You know, if you're not white, straight, cis, Christian in my country, you're going to be a minority, which is true for all Western countries to a certain extent. But in my country, it means like it is 90+% that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're very much a minority. There's been an increase in diversity in the past decade, but when I was a teenager, it was me and one of my best friends who was gay, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then there was, I mean, like I can remember when the first Black person came to my school.
My
Do you know what I
goodness.
mean?
Yeah.
It's that kind of, and there was one person from Korea, and then the other 300 kids were white. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was that kind of environment, and there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of homophobia, and there's a lot of all kinds of, you know, or there was a lot of homophobia. I think it's gotten better. Even though I am trans, I didn't really develop an understanding of queer culture because there was none where I was from, right? And so the development in the broadening of the meaning of transgender was like, it was something that I think because of my own internalized transphobia was something that I resisted a little bit. Now, however, I'm not like that anymore. Luckily, I have great friends who have challenged me to look deep, deep, deep inside myself and see where that came from that place of self-hatred and harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, being trans today, I don't really know what it means still. But I think I thought I knew what it meant, but now I don't, and I'm okay with that. I don't need it. I don't need it to be anything. People also ask me what it means to be a woman to me, and I'm like, I don't know. Do you know? Like,
Does anyone?
It's all, you know. And I'm sometimes hesitant to discuss my experiences in that sense because I trigger people on both sides. The anti queer side and the queer side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And usually because people are sensitive about these issues, and anything that doesn't align with their beliefs is an attack sometimes to people. And I understand because they are sensitive. And so I have a hard time navigating some of the conversations because I'm someone who believes that a lot of things can be true at once.
Yes.
Right.
Which is how the world works.
Right. It's nuanced. And so to me, I can consider, like, I've had, I call it sex reassignment surgery. It has other names now. I had sex reassignment surgery. And so would it not be disingenuous for me to say that I don't consider one genital is one thing and another genital is another thing, right? Like, because if I didn't, why would I have had surgery? It makes very little sense, right?
Yeah.
And so, but to me, my experience of that does not mean that someone else can't feel differently, right? And I think, you know, people, especially online, because a lot of people are young online, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and when you're young, it's very black and white, and it's either this or this, right or wrong, so and so. And to me, some of the conversations just aren't very helpful because it isn't that black and white.
Yeah.
You might be trans in a way that is very fluid and very all encompassing and very, you know, not very rigid, right? You may be trans in a way that is quite rigid, but it just doesn't include your whole body.
Yeah.
And it might include your social identity a lot more. Or you may be trans just like me, except for that one thing, right?
Yeah.
Someone said to me, well, just because I do 9 out of 10 and you do 10 out of 10, it doesn't mean that you are more. And I was like, no, but to you, it's 9 out of 10. To me, it is the one thing I would need to do, period.
Yeah.
Like, if I could do nothing else, if I couldn't even live authentically, present myself authentically, I would still have to do that in order to survive.
Yeah.
And so there is a difference to me, because to you, it's, my gender has nothing to do with my genitals. To me, they very much have, like,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call gender, again, man, woman, whatever, it's all invented anyway, right? But my experience of myself and what we now call a woman is rooted in my experience with my entire body, specifically my genitals.
Yeah. There are
But
so many different, like, it's
yes,
intersectionality, isn't it? People not understanding all
yes,
those different layers. And I really
yes,
like what you're saying as well about the fact that it isn't just this binary thing, it's this spectrum of things. And like you were saying, the person
yeah,
said, oh, I'm 9 out of 10, but you're 10 out of 10. It's like, well, actually, there are so
yeah,
many different experiences to have in life, in
yes,
anything, that this isn't really, it's
no.
not really a paint by numbers thing, is it? It's
No,
a
like
matter of, yeah.
you're assuming that we're experiencing the same thing, and
Mm,
I've just had that one more thing. When in
yeah.
truth, I respect your womanhood and your identity fully,
Mm,
but it's come from a different place than mine has, because
yeah.
mine is rooted in that one thing that you don't care about.
Yeah.
My entire experience begins and ends. Like, I had bottom surgery like a decade ago, right? Like,
Mm,
it's not an active part of my life.
mm,
I don't consider myself particularly trans anymore, because
yeah.
there really isn't, like, because I don't have to, in a way,
Mm,
right? I don't have a reminder on my physical body in that
mm,
sense that
yeah.
I don't remember what anything else feels like. But socially, I am trans. I am a trans person socially, but I had a very untrans uh, experience in the sense of immersing myself in queer culture. The only thing being queer, quote unquote, meant to me growing up with was abuse and
Mm,
oppression and marginalization. And it took me, even after starting my public speaking and working through, it actually took me watching Pose to understand the beauty in in what we are.
yeah.
And it changed my life. Like, Pose changed my life.
Mm,
um and it's perfect that it is Pose, because it's Black trans people, because
mm,
before Black trans people, it was Black cis women who have
yeah.
always inspired me the most,
Mm,
spoken to me the most. And I'm still learning from both Black queer people and Black and cis women,
mm,
because I find that the way that both Black queer people and Black cis women carry so much empathy in their struggle
mhm.
and articulate the struggle in a way that can only come from decades, if not centuries, of talking about it.
Yeah.
That level of insight into
Mm,
it. Even as I listen to Black women talk about being a Black woman, I understand myself better as a
mhm.
trans person, right?
Yeah.
So it was um, it was very on brand that it was Pose that made me understand something that literally no amount of searching inside myself could do for me.
I think it's great when there are things in popular culture that you can
Yeah,
identify with, see yourself in, that can really help. Almost like it's like an awakening of all these different things and aspects of you. And what
yeah,
you were saying there about the kind of speaking to and listening to, like, people from the Black community, Black queer and Black cis women. And I was literally listening to a book earlier, and there was a particular sentence, and it was talking about the fact that because women in particular, because we have historically a distance from power, we are better at interpersonal relationships, because that is the only way that you can kind of step forward, advocate for yourself, and all that learning about doing it and everything else. That's what that does. So I think it's that kind of that distance from power. It can
mm,
increase your empathy and can
yes,
increase your ability to, I suppose, communicate these things and embrace others and communicate that message
yes,
to others as well.
100%. And I think I actually saw this because there's a lot of angry white queers who get angry when, and particularly Black women, say that racism and queerphobia is not the same. It's not like, I have never met a Black cis woman who has been eager to compare our struggles while talking over me.
Yeah.
but I am sure the opposite is very often true,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And so when that's what you're met with, I think, like, to me, trying to look at it from a place of like, where, where is that? That's what I would imagine.
Yeah.
It's that where a lot of the times when you meet a white queer, you meet a white queer, right?
Mhm.
And they're just focused on, we're both oppressed,
Yeah.
right? And then get spoken over, get ignored,
Mhm.
it's like, no, I'm going to use AADE if I want to. It's also my culture. It's just that there's just no listening, right?
Mhm.
There's so much respect when I interact with Black women, where, yes, someone might be very focused on it not being the same, but they're also not talking over my experiences when I share them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I understand where that comes from as well. I mean, it isn't the same, first of all, obviously,
Yeah.
but I can understand that it's tiresome to hear white queers compare struggles if it's always talk and never listen, right?
Mhm.
And I also think, like you said, with the compassion and the empathy and understanding those things, it makes the awful stereotypes about Black women even more wrong and ironic, because in my experience, like I said, Black women are the ones who carry the most compassion and have the most empathy and have the most understanding.
And it's like, it's
Yeah.
interesting what you were saying about like watching Pose and how that I suppose kind of got you in touch with yourself and kind of made you understand different aspects of yourself, particularly like you were saying, growing up on the Faroe Islands, where it's not like you live in the UK and then you can literally be like, this hometown is too small for me, I'm going to go to London. You can't go and
Yes.
find your community. You are
Yeah.
literally trapped on an island. So do you
Yes.
think, like, I was actually speaking recently with Tabby Lamb, who's like a brilliant comedian, and we were talking about the increased presence of gender representation on TV and how important that is, and
Yes.
how good. Obviously, there are positives and negatives, and I was saying, like, much like there's an increase, particularly since June 2020, there is because everyone panicked. They were like, put all the Black people on TV, and so there's like an increased presence of Black people on TV.
Yes. Yes.
Which I think is great, but then it has
Yes.
some people are tripping over it. They cannot. They're like, there's no Black in the Union Jack and all that kind of shit. Do you think
Yes.
that the increased visibility of trans people and these gender identities on TV is helping the trans community? Or
I think increased visibility. I mean, just thinking about, I never thought, like, this is the sinister way that that you begin to oppress yourself,
yeah,
because being oppressed, it infects your mind like a virus, and you begin to consider yourself unimportant too. And I remember very vividly not thinking representation of trans people was important. I remember thinking, does it really matter who writes the stories as long as they're being written? Do you know what I mean? This is when I was quite younger, but I
yeah,
was so entrenched in this idea of, I honestly don't even know what. I think you learn to resent yourself to such a degree that you don't even consider it important that you tell your own stories. Like, I don't know where that came from, right? But and then obviously growing older, I could begin to understand why it was important for everyone else
yeah,
but me.
yes,
Right? I could understand why it was important for Black people, and why it was important for Muslims, or why it was important for, I don't know, anyone, right?
everybody,
But
yeah.
just not trans people. Like, I could not understand why that was so important. And
Mhm.
that's, again, that's when you have the cis het normativity in your own mind keeping you down.
Yeah, and I think it's just, yeah, there is so much that people don't understand. So
Yeah.
people talk about what trans rights are, or what they think they are.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think people, and I say people, I don't know who I say people in this grand scheme. What do you think people who do not understand any part of this think trans rights are, and what are they actually?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think not understanding trans rights often comes with not understanding trans people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that because what transness is so incredibly complex, and we then demand people speak about it and then
Yeah.
are unhappy with what they say, right? And it's like you'll ask a trans woman to describe how she knew she was female, or that she felt female, and it'll be things like, oh, I played with dolls and I did things, and it's like, that doesn't define womanhood or being female, right? But you're asking someone, how did you know your gender identity? And like, how do you explain that, right?
Yeah.
And so you try to explain to the best of your ability, and it's never going to be good enough, because the truth is, you just know.
Yeah, and
you just
suppose
know.
you're using metrics that you think other people will understand, like playing with dolls or putting shoes on, because it's almost kind of trying to distill that.
But also metrics and a narrative that's been pushed onto you. People need to understand that the history of treating trans people, only people who conformed were treated. And so if you read medical text and there's a lot of that, it's because if you were not that, they would not grant you treatment. Do you know what I mean? And so people had to say things like, oh yes, I've always been a girly girl so much, even if it's not true, because if they didn't, they wouldn't get treatment, right? But there's also, I think, when it comes to trans rights, I think trans rights are fundamentally about every individual's right to be themselves, whoever, and define that for themselves and who that may be. And so I sometimes feel like trans rights or trans identities threaten patriarchy in the way that because it threatens the gender binary, right? I mean, I'm not inventing the wheel here. This is very well known, but it does it in that specific way where it threatens also, quote unquote, or at least this is what it appears to threaten to some cis women, the gendered protections that they have built from men, right? From cis men. And so it feels as if it's an attack on that too. But I feel like those cis women, they are protecting themselves under the binary that oppresses them.
Yeah.
It's identifying into the system that oppresses you, but with conviction. It's not the same as being a person of color and understanding that racism is a reality in present reality, and therefore such and such. It would be identifying into racism as something inherently real, as something that's biologically real. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And identifying into that system and trying to get to get protections out of that system. Whereas when it comes to gender and sex, like most issues that cis women face by cis men happen under the gender binary, the cis het gender binary. Yeah. So even things like genital mutilation, that people are like, it's sex-based oppression. And it's like, no, it's actually gender-based oppression performed on sex.
Yeah.
Like when they say, yeah, well, because some people say it happens to trans men too. And people say, because they have a vagina. Like, exactly. Because they have a vulva. Exactly. Because of gendered perception and assigned gender, etc. It's not like an inherent biological need to circumcise women. It's a choice. It's a choice under a culture that is binary gendered, where women are considered subservient and inferior, and womanhood is assigned to you by your genitals. And so, why are you identifying heavily into this system?
Yeah.
As a belief, not as a reality and like a social reality, because it is a social reality, but why are you identifying into it on an individual level? Like, you're so invested in keeping it true, rather than understanding that unpacking it and releasing people from it would actually benefit everyone, right?
Yeah. Well, I suppose these are the socialized behaviors that have basically been created and upheld to support patriarchy.
Yes.
And that's always going to be a difficult one for people to escape from and separate things from. There are some things when people have talked about like sex-based oppression and kind of where that sits at odds with trans rights and trans people. I always find it really stressful because it completely forgets and leaves out trans men. And it also, I don't know, I know that I'm being reductive when I say this, so I'm saying it with a small caveat at the beginning. As a person who cannot get away from the thing that oppresses her, like you can see, unless someone is visually impaired,
Yes.
They, you know, everyone knows what I am. And I always think it always just feels smacks a little bit of people looking for things to be oppressed about, because the things that they're complaining about are so few and far between. Not that we shouldn't, obviously, again, it's the impact. If it's impacting you, yes, it's important. But the things that they're focusing on are so few and far between and so small. And it's like, wow, imagine being that, like, lacking that much oppression that you're just making shit up.
Yes.
That's what it feels like.
But also,
I know it isn't, because I know that's reductive. I'm not saying none of those things are important to people, but it just, that's what it feels like I think for someone that is marginalized. You're like, really? Come on, man.
Yeah, but also if you want to talk about sex-based oppression, how are you gonna get around the argument that trans women are also oppressed based on their sex?
This is another thing. It's kind of really, it's like a kind of a crash course, like a guy, I don't know, it's like smashing people into kind of misogyny slightly. Trans women, like, it's so weird. It's kind of misogyny, and it's not, and it is, at the end of the day, yes, I'm a Black woman, and the people that are most in danger when you are having these conversations are Black trans women. That's my sister. And it's not like it's this easy decision. We've just woken up, and again, not everyone is going to present like you, like Ceecee, like you, that where it's like, this is Ceecee, this is how Ceecee looks. Like you said, there wasn't like a period of transition for you. There are other people where it's like, it's not going to be that obvious, and it's going to be so much more of a transition, and that's a whole process to put themselves through. So I feel like the whole thing just always feels really reductive of any experiences that trans people have, and reductive
and that's also a good point
issues.
It's a good point to highlight as well, is that I look, for lack of a better word, I'm a very palatable trans person to people, right? I think people like to put me on things, or put my face on things. I mean, I like to believe that I also have thoughts and ideas that are worth talking about, but I think also people find me palatable. The amount of times I've heard things like, well, I mean, look at you, you were clearly supposed to be female, and stuff like that. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way, right? It doesn't. But regarding the sex-based oppression and you know, white middle class women, the cis women most likely to face like severe sex-based oppression are also not white, first of all. And second of all, trans people are also oppressed on the basis of their sex. That's like the entire point. Like the entire point of being trans, right? Like it's a differently oppressed. But you know what? And this is something, and this is, I think, something that is especially, not that every person of color or every woman of color understands this either, but I think it's extra difficult for white women to understand, right? Is that all women are not oppressed equally. All women are not oppressed equally. And so if you're talking about your sex-based oppression up in, you know, Northern England as a white woman, upper middle class, talking about your oppression as a woman, there is going to be a woman of color wearing her hijab, maybe she's Black as well, who's going to listen to you, and you're not going to have the same experience just because you both have your period. You know what I mean? And the person more likely to die from reproductive disorders or what's it called, negligence, is also not going to be white. And so you talk as if you're still at the bottom of something, but the truth is, white women have always been right underneath white men. When I was doing an event, and I was like accepted into like a circle of white women, is when like I had an awakening, and I was like, I don't have anything in common with you though. Like I don't have anything. I have my whiteness in common with you, but it's like I don't have your experience. Like I don't share anything with you really. And like my issue is not, will I be on the board of directors? It's, will any company hire me? You know what I mean? It's
absolutely.
I have that issue too, right? For different reasons. And whether or not it's going to be the white trans woman or the Black cis woman who's going to be hired is going to be a matter of what is the more heavier prejudice in this company. Do you know what I mean? And between the both of us, the Black trans woman is probably the one who's least likely. You know, when I said like before, like white women are right under white men, it's like that was like what I meant, right? It's like there's white men, and then there's white women, and white women think they're here with the rest of us. And or the rest of us, but you know what I mean. And they're, you know, they're not. They're not at all. Someone like J.K. Rowling, who will invalidate trans identities based on her prejudice, and then identify into an oppression that doesn't that even when she was like poorer, would not affect her to the same degree as the people she speaks on behalf of, right? But and so trans people, we do face sex-based oppression. Our oppression is literally because our gender and our sex misalign, and because, and it's again that thing where the gender that we were assigned so it is sex-based, quote unquote, in the same way, right? But it also just goes to show that it has very little to do with sex and everything to do with gender. I think it's very important to remember that there are cis women allies who identify very much with their physical bodies because they have been used against them their whole lives, and who are used to being talked over by people about their issues, and doing so isn't helpful at all. There is also the added element of this conversation, which is that a lot of trans people have been socialized as the gender they were assigned at birth. And so we know this for trans men. We talk about it with trans men a lot because it's a positive. We talk about how trans men have been socialized as female, and how that often adds great character to their personalities, right? Because quite frankly, how we socialize girls and women is better. Sorry, but that's the truth.
Because boys are socialized differently. Actually, by the time before they're 13, there's a massive empathy gap between girls and boys, which is absolutely is I suppose the root of a lot of problems for men and women as we get older.
Yes, exactly. And so, but the inverse will be true then too. A lot of trans women have been socialized as men, not everyone, but a lot of them. And so because you have always felt differently, or just because, quote unquote, that you've transitioned like 6 months ago, it's not like that you've unlearned 35 years of your life suddenly.
Yeah. I mean, look at Caitlyn Jenner.
Exactly.
Yet to unlearn being an arsehole.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes that does bleed into how you communicate with people. It's a hard conversation to have, because in most interactions in every interaction with a cis person, you are going to be the one who's genderedly more oppressed, right? And so and you're the one who's going to be invalidated more. And so it's a really hard, heavy conversation to have, how that socialization affects how you interact with cis women due to internalized misogyny. I struggle to see how it would. Why would you be immune to that internalization just because you're trans? You know, like cis women internalize misogyny too. Like it's not like it's unique. But if you've been socialized as male for most of your life, it doesn't just go, like how you've been socialized doesn't just go away. It's like if you've witnessed violence in the home, it doesn't just go away because you move out. Do you know what I mean? It's like things stay with you. And so these are the honest conversations that I don't really see people having. They just pretend like either it gets weaponized against trans people, or it gets defended as in it isn't an issue, or it doesn't happen, or it isn't like that, right? And I find violent and angry and disgusting, and the other I find disingenuous. And again, it's easy for me to say because I was not socialized as male. I was never a part of male society. I was probably socialized. I was around boys less than other girls, probably. I've never been part of a male circle. So it's easy for me to have this conversation because it doesn't affect me. It doesn't trigger me. It doesn't, it's not a part of my lived reality. So it's easy for me to be like, we have to have these tough conversations because they don't affect me. But there's still, I don't know. Do you ever feel that?
Oh, all the time. There are so many things, like me and my friends will say, we'll talk about it amongst ourselves. We're like, this isn't a conversation in front of white people, because this is massive in our community, but this isn't something that is, even though it may be directly impacted by racism, it's not something that they are actively doing. It's part of the system. So we need to discuss it. There are, for example, homophobia in the Black community, which is a byproduct of colonialism and the forcing religion on people. So because that was something that happened ages ago, that's not something I'm going to go and now speak to a white person about and say, look what you did. But it's an issue that is massive.
And it gets weaponized by white people.
Exactly, yeah. And then some people will brush it under the carpet in the community and other people won't. A really good example of, and this is I suppose where intersectionality comes into play. A man I know who is he's awesome, and he's so on the button with all these different issues. And then when it was the talking about Sarah Everard and when she was murdered by that police officer, and then it was women talking about their experiences online. And then some guys, including this one, said, wow, so we've been waiting for ages for stuff, but then this happens, and then it's like, oh, they go to the front of the queue. And I had to point out, there's not a queue. Equality isn't pie or Skittles or pizza. It's like, it's something that we're all striving for. And I said, what? And so a lot of Black men were brushing it under the carpet. And I was like, no, it's about men. You're also a man. I'm also a woman. That, yes, they're talking about things that affect me too as a woman. Not racism isn't the only thing that affects me. So I get that, because they will think that as a Black woman, racism is the only thing that's affecting you, because they can't see past their own misogyny, and they can't see past their own gender to understand more. So I completely get that. Yeah.
I follow a lot of very, very intelligent, articulate Black women online who share their experiences very honestly and rawly. Is that a word? And this reminds me of, a lot of them talk about how you said, oh, now this happens and now suddenly we're important. But a lot of them talk about how, yeah, but when it happens to Black people, it's Black men who are important. It's not the Black women who get the front page either, right?
Absolutely.
So there's that experience of someone like, right, here we are in solidarity, and it's like, actually no, like, it's not me getting the front page, it's you, right? Like, so even you're upset with her getting the front page, but like, you, like, between us, you would get the front page, not me, right? So it's like keeping that in mind as well. And anyway, but like with this interesting part about Sarah Everard, was that her? Sorry, I mean, me and names, but most of the anti-racist pages that I follow did post about that in a compassionate, positive way, which I think is beautiful to watch. My initial reaction was like, why are people acting as if this is suddenly, like, this isn't news to anyone? You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it was beautiful to see people who are so affected by affect and apathy and just a chronic disregard for your well-being, to see demonstrations of empathy. Yeah. I know empathy shouldn't be shocking, but it is. It is always shocking.
Absolutely.
And it always comes from the people who get it the least. That is how that tends to work. So that was really, it's beautiful to see people able to remain compassionate to others, even when that other represents a focus you're not getting on a person who looks like your oppressor, who is your oppressor. It's a lesson in humility that I think everyone needs to learn sometimes, because we get caught up.
Okay, so to wrap up, I mean, I've loved this, and I have to get you on again. I'm gonna absolutely have to get you on again, because this is awesome. What is one myth you would like to bust about being trans?
I think I want to do two things. I want to bust a myth that seems prevalent, and I want to say something as well. And I'm sure if it's like a myth, but I really want to highlight the fact that trans people are not a monolith. We're not a unit. We are scattered and scared and not powerful, and live lives that are constantly oppressed. I think that's the main difference between trans people and other marginalized people, is that there is no trans community. There is no not really. There's not really, unless maybe in New York City or something, but a lot of us do not have a trans community. There is not, and if it is, it's small, it's tiny, and it doesn't protect you in that same way. And so, and you don't belong to something bigger out in the world either. There is not a country of trans people. You don't belong anywhere. And so it is lonely. It's very lonely. And if you are then doubly marginalized, Black and trans, rejected for one thing and maybe rejected for the other thing within your own community as well, it's extra hard, right? And so trans people are often very traumatized. And I think, and this is true just for trauma in general, like, please stop expecting good things from traumatized people.
Yeah.
I am so tired of the idea that if you've been traumatized, you are supposed to be kinder, nicer, more empathetic, more this, more gracious, more forgiving, more like more Jesus. When in truth, if all you know is hatred and violence and evil and oppression and alienation and loneliness, why are you expected to be a good person? Why are you expected to make all the right choices? Why are you expected to be full of light and love and goodness when the world does not want goodness to happen to you? And that doesn't mean it can't, and doesn't mean it doesn't often happen. But please stop expecting that of people. Stop treating trans people as like some powerful monolith that is trying to do nefarious things. But in reality, it's typically, and also even the people online that get angry and violent about their oppression, you know, it's scared, powerless individuals is what we are.
Yeah.
We're not powerful. We're not a monolith. We're vulnerable and traumatized. And so I was 19 the first time a man showed me a kindness. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the first time a man treated me like a person. I was 19.
Yeah.
Someone who wasn't like my dad. And I want to bust the myth that trauma is like results in mild anxiety and depression. It can result in complex, flawed individuals that carry a lot of baggage. And this notion that just because you've been traumatized, it doesn't mean that it's okay for you to then, like, yeah, but it isn't just because. Like, do you know what trauma is? Do you know what trauma does to people? It isn't just because. It's never, trauma is never, or in systematic oppression is never just because. Doesn't mean that we should just let people fall to the ground and be awful.
Yeah.
But please, you need to hold more compassion for people who are marginalized and traumatized. And if you want to hold anyone to a higher standard, hold yourself to a higher standard. Hold the people in your life who are not marginalized to a higher, hold rich people to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I had a friend of mine who's had a very traumatic childhood as well, and left her with a lot of anger. And I could see I could see the anger consuming her more and more and more. I had tried empathy and I had tried, quiet absorption. And then I just tried something very different. I just I shouted, quote unquote, like I met her with anger, like not anger at her, but just with anger as the emotion. And I said to her, the only thing you're doing right now is that person took away so much of your life. And right now, even though you have nothing to do with this person right now, even though they're not able to hurt you in any way, you are still allowing this person to hurt you in your mind because you keep focusing on those things. You keep them present with you everywhere you go. And that is a choice you are making and something that you can choose to let go of. And so they're living their life, living large, living happy, not being punished. You sitting here in my car shouting about them is not punishing them, it is punishing yourself.
Yeah.
And that like clicked something. Like I think that's where they began to understand what I mean when I talk about forgiveness. It just means letting go. It means that forgiveness is about you, about them going on to live their life and you sitting here in my car still miserable.
Yeah.
Even though it's been years. And you, like, nothing, if they went to prison or if they died, nothing has actually changed in your life, but somehow you'd be able to let go. Why can't you let go right now? Like my key message to everyone is that we are in many ways the orchestrators of our own misery. And that's not to say that our external misery isn't real and valid, but the attention and focus we put on every slight, every offense, and the perfection that we demand of other people when they interact with us, and etc. Like we just make ourselves feel worse.
Yeah.
I believe in happiness through being a good person. So if you can create a healthy inner mind and a healthy way of communicating with people, it doesn't mean that you're never going to say fuck you, you asshole to anyone. It doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
It means that if you can strive to be good and forgiving, compassionate and grateful, it keeps you focused on what matters and it enables you to release the external things, not that they don't matter because they impact you a lot, but it's just, if you experience transphobia, is your life improved if you keep holding on to it after someone is being transphobic to you? Is your life improved when you sit at home with your family, have your meal, and are happy if you have a family that loves you? A lot of people don't. I just mean, whatever it is that your good circumstances, is it benefiting you to, in those moments, also be constantly in touch with what's bad in your life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah. I think everything you've said has, and I think that even with people, but how judgmental they are of others, and people that are living on the wrong side of history when it comes to transphobia, racism, and all that fun stuff, they could choose to adopt that as well, because it's about forgiveness, it's about letting things go, and it's also about kind of minding your own business a lot of the time as well, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't understand how people aren't more self-absorbed. I'm very self-absorbed. I don't have time to bother with what people do with their lives. I'm like, I genuinely don't care unless you want to tell me. Like, I'm not, like, whatever my neighbors are doing, unless they want to tell me, I don't give a shit. Like, it's them, right? And I see it, you see with ACT. Also, we need to remember, and I try to remember this as well, it's very easy to forget that even just 10 years ago, access to knowledge was different. 20 years ago, different. And also that access to knowledge only matters if you know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And so for young people growing up now with activists everywhere spewing, a lot of these things seem like, oh, of course. But I remember a moment in time before YouTube where even the fact that you had to blend eye makeup was not like, of course, to people, because we'd never seen a makeup tutorial. And so I try to remember that these things are recently changed, and I can't possibly expect everyone to understand or to know what they don't know, because we grow up hearing things as well, right? So making space for people to grow with them. Obviously, if they refuse to grow, like, whatever. Like, you're not forced to like make space for people in your life who just refuse to listen, right? I think every time you respond with anger to something, you internalize it. Yeah. And so whenever people are nasty to me, if I get nasty back, and also you're going to inadvertently say something that's hurtful to more than this person. Mm-hmm. You're going to say something that's suddenly, like, if you're not actually transphobic, but I say something or do something that offends you and you call me a fucking tranny, like, you don't just harm me, you harm a group of people. Mm-hmm. If I call you a racial slur, it doesn't matter if I'm not racist, I'm hurting, like, it hurts everyone, right? Mm-hmm. And so, even just keeping like basic things like that in mind, that or even if it isn't about, if you say something transphobic to me and I make fun of your dead mom, everyone with a dead mom is going to feel that. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't even have to be a point of oppression, just a point of trauma and sadness, and weaponizing someone's trauma and sadness or oppression is not a gun, or it's not a sword, it's a grenade. Absolutely. That's going to take out civilians, That's stupid enough.
No, that's perfect. That's a brilliant analogy. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was awesome. Where can we find you online? What's your Instagram, TikTok, etc.?
So my Instagram is at Ceecee Jacobsen. Mm-hmm. My OnlyFans is at Ceecee Jacobsen. Mm-hmm. TikTok is at Ceecee Jacobsen and then an extra C at the end. Yeah. And my website is ceeceejacobsen.com. And Ceecee is like C-E-E, Jacobsen with S-E-N at the end. Brilliant. Complicated name, apparently.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.
And I look forward to having you on again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Speak On. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, co-workers, strangers in the street. To find out more about us, including our upcoming events, head over to Instagram, instagram.com/speakon_. Bye!